Hello and welcome back to the channel. As always, I'm your host, Morgan. Now you may have noticed that I've been absent for a hot minute, or 3-ish years for those of you that want something more specific. And anyone who's wondering why, I'm going to give you a quick Cliff's Notes reason right now. Once I graduated college, I did get a full-time job where I was traveling a bunch, and then my partner, who did all my video editing for me, and I did break up. I have a crippling fear of failure at times, and that kept me from learning how to edit my own videos and keep putting out content for you guys. But since I'm still the same latte drinking, tree hugging, science loving girl that I was before, naturally I've got things to say, so here we are. And it looks like I've got my notes right here, so it's time to go ahead and grab your snowflake drink of choice and let's get into it. Most of you may know that here in the United States, we are deep in a very intense presidential election year. In fact, it's the third intense presidential election year in a row. And one of the reasons that's making this year so intense and a little bit scary for a lot of people is the looming threat of Project 2025 being held over our heads. So we need to talk about this today because it is important. What exactly is Project 2025? Well, according to the website, it is a plan for conservatives to start undoing the damage the left has wrought and build a better country for all Americans in 2025. Essentially, it's a manifesto. There is a PDF available for anybody who would like to go look through the project and what it has to say, but keep in mind the PDF is 920 pages long, so there is quite a lot to this document and this proposed plan. This Project 2025 is backed by the Heritage Foundation, which we'll talk a little bit more about in just a couple moments here. But what they have done is they've designed this manifesto to put policies into place as soon as there's a conservative president in the White House. So basically, it's a blueprint for whoever gets into the White House. This is what they want to have done. And as of right now, the perfect pawn for them is Donald Trump. For those of you that don't know, which I assume there's not many of you that don't know, Donald Trump is a former president of the United States. He beat Hillary Clinton, and now he lost to Joe Biden, whose term is currently ending, and he is running again against Kamala Harris currently. But we need to ask the question, does Donald Trump actually support Project 2025? Well, he's publicly said that he, 1, knows nothing about Project 2025, 2, does not support everything in it, and 3, wishes them luck. Which, that statement in and of itself is a little bit of a contradiction, because how can you know nothing about it, but still know that you don't support everything in it? Because if you know nothing about it, surely you don't know that you do or do not support what is in it. But I digress. We need to keep in mind that many of the policies in Project 2025 either align perfectly with policies that Trump has proposed or directly call to bring back Trump-era policies. So there is that. And I personally am of the opinion that Trump has only made distance publicly with himself in Project 2025 so that he doesn't scare away more moderate and undecided voters. And there have been people associated with Project 2025 and the Heritage Foundation that have essentially said the same thing, that it's a smart political move, not saying that you want to enact Project 2025, because it is very radical, is going to be the word I'm going to go with, because it is. And then also, when we're thinking about the question of does Trump support it, we have to look at the official Republican Party platform, which is Agenda 47, and there's a lot of overlap, so do with that information what you will. But let's move on to what exactly is the Heritage Foundation, since I've mentioned them a couple of times. Well, they're a conservative think tank, and they claim to be advocating for the, quote, traditional American values, which, if you really start peeling off the layers under their rhetoric and the Project 2025 rhetoric, those traditional American values they're advocating for are white Christian values. And it's important to note white Christian because they have a very specific version of America that they would like us to go back to. And in all this, they're claiming to be advocates for the American people, with the little asterisk noting that you better fall into the correct category for them to be advocating for you. So that white Christian conservative category. And if you're outside of that box, you can screw off as far as they're concerned. But without getting any more into that, let's talk about what some of the big, more well-known points of Project 2025 are. So if you've heard about it before, these are probably some of the talking points that you've heard. So first on the list is basically to essentially destroy that separation of church and government. And for anyone wondering what I mean there, I mean that separation of church and state. That's probably what you've heard it as, but I did hear the phrase separation of church and government used during an episode of The Line, and I think that that phrase is a little bit less ambiguous and gives people trying to destroy that separation a little less wiggle room. So I've adopted using that phrase more because I just find it a little bit more to the point. And it's interesting because this particular separation is written directly into our Constitution. So people who claim to want to uphold the Constitution are actively working to violate part of it, and I find that ironic and problematic. One of the next big points of theirs is to prioritize pro-life policies. So that would mean no longer recognizing abortion as valid health care in any case, banning the morning after pill, defunding Planned Parenthood, which, is a pretty tired, greatest hit conservative talking point. Banning fertility treatments like IVF, which is interesting because IVF is used to create families. So you would think they would be in favor of that, but because with fertility treatments, there are sometimes embryos that end up getting destroyed, they're not too pleased with that one. So ban IVF. And then define marriage and family by the Bible, which, one man, one woman, and their offspring. So if you are not part of that particular outline or blueprint, your family, your marriage, not valid according to them. Getting rid of gender affirming care is one of the big talking points. And they do list that any challenge to that two-sex or gender or hard binary system is just junk science, which is interesting because the legitimate science that does not agree with their closed-minded and bigoted ways, I guess that's just junk because it doesn't agree with them. At least that's what they would say. There's verbiage in there about putting caps on Medicaid benefits and those government-assisted medical care benefits, which is horrifying. The whole healthcare system in the United States really needs a big overhaul, but that is a whole nother video topic potentially, and that is a rant I can get on very easily. So yeah, making our healthcare system even more screwy than it already is. Because, we all love the looming threat of bankruptcy if we happen to break a bone or need a surgery. Eliminate the Department of Education. So basically they want to defund public schools because they are too liberal and indoctrinating, and funnel that money towards private Christian institutions, which go back to that separation of church and government thing, because that's problematic there as well. Again, re-emphasizing to prioritize those Christian families. So if you're single or you don't fall into that Christian man-woman family dynamic, there's problems ahead for you because you are not as valid as that Christian family unit. Remove protections for the LGBTQ plus individuals and community, so won't be recognized as a protected class anymore, potentially, based on what they are outlining in the document. Another big thing that is kind of already done is making a database of supporters so that the next conservative president will know exactly who to appoint and where. And these supporters are people that would 100% without a doubt back everything in Project 2025, so they are just yes men. And that already technically exists. And then this has just been kind of a snapshot of some of the big points in Project 2025. Remember, this is a 920-page document, so there is so much more. But we're not going to focus on any of the things I just talked about. What we are going to focus on is their agriculture and climate change sections. And I've specifically chosen these topics because they are what I am best equipped to talk about. My background is in biology, especially that environmental area. I work in a forestry field for my regular big girl job, and this is the stuff that I know the most about. So we will be using some bullet points from Stop the Coup 2025, mainly because while I have read the necessary sections of the document, these bullet points are a little bit easier to digest. I have linked the document and this Stop the Coup website in the description so you can go look at them. And I'm also going to add my own thoughts in. Don't worry, I will be commentating some more. I'm not just going to read the bullet points, but they will give us a nice visual to kind of stay on track. So how will Project 2025 impact agriculture? And here are the bullet points. Use an executive order to reverse Biden administration regulations for food and animal safety. Push America First agricultural production policies. End required food safety labeling and shift to a voluntary labeling system. Cut back farmer subsidies and federal aid programs. Remove climate smart regulations for environmental protection and climate change. Eliminate the Conservation Reserve Program so farmers will no longer have a financial incentive to conserve parts of their land and not work them. My thoughts on all of these are, let's start with that America First agriculture point, because I think it's mostly a dog whistle and a little nudge to people that like that kind of verbiage and rhetoric in the political or media kind of stuff that they consume. And the reason I think this is that because according to the FDA, the US only imports about 15% of our total food supply. 15. So that means that our farmers are already supplying us pretty well. And never mind the fact that we do export plenty of products as well, and it just wouldn't be possible to produce every single thing that we consume here because some of it we don't have the right climates to grow some things, and just they're regional because of X, Y, and Z different factors. But moving on from there, getting rid of food and animal safety is completely bonkers to me. It could easily result in increases in preventable illnesses spreading. Improper labeling can result in people accidentally coming into contact with allergens because they weren't labeled on the freaking packaging. And I get that some of this may seem a little crazy, that, oh, there's no way any of that would happen, but if it is a voluntary system and there's not actually regulation in place, which that would be the most extreme version of this stuff, it could happen. And that is a problem. I mean, we already have recalls with food because whoopsies happen with things getting into produce and stuff. It happens. in a regulated world. So imagine with even less regulation. And then getting rid of animal safety, that's just cruel. Now, I'm not vegetarian, I'm not vegan, I do eat meat and consume dairy products and other animal products, but I still believe that the animals that we are using and consuming deserve to be treated with dignity and have a safe life leading up to whatever end may be in the cards for them. And yes, before you jump into my comments to yell about factory farms and stuff, I am well aware that there are issues in the United States with factory farms and animal welfare in general in farming conditions. That would be a whole nother video topic in and of itself. I don't have the answers there, but if you want me to talk about it at some other time and flesh out more of my thoughts, put it in the comments below and I'll be more than happy to do that in the future. But this video, not the place, we don't have the time. So then moving on to the cutting back on those farmer subsidies and federal aid programs, that's only gonna harm the small farmers that already kind of struggle to keep up with the big guys. So how is that very America first? Or does America first have that little asterisk in there that as long as our corporate overlords are happy? Because that's what it seems like to me a little bit. Because those federal programs and aid, they benefit the small farmers. And then eliminating those climate smart policies, that's gonna only increase the issues that our farmers are already experiencing. Some of those issues include air pollution having negative impact on crops, altered growing seasons changing the interactions between plants or crops and pollinators, which is an issue. Changes in precipitation are resulting in increased erosion in some areas and increased drought in others. Water and soil quality are changing and negatively impacting agriculture. Increased heat and pollution are negatively impacting the health of livestock and agricultural workers, in addition to negatively impacting crop production. And then climate smart policies are put into place to help mitigate those problems. If we get rid of them, they're only gonna get worse. So how is that very America agriculture first if those problems get worse and make it harder on our farmers? Answer me that. But since that's kind of the long and short of my thoughts there without getting too ranty, let's move on to what Project 2025 says about climate change. So, first things first, the bullet points. Project 2025 calls for the next GOP president to immediately freeze, then reverse all policies that aim to mitigate climate change. Let that sink in. The next point, they emphasize that climate change is a myth, which, is kind of like the right-wing climate change talking point. Greatest hits coming back at you. Climate change is an excuse to limit Americans' freedom, which, goes hand in hand with that myth thing. Climate change advocates are environmental extremists or climate fanatics. Hi, how are you? That's me. I guess I'm an extremist and a fanatic. Climate change programs kill the economy. All talk about climate change is fear-based rhetoric. Yeah, be afraid that the climate is going to change to the point where we have a planet where we go extinct and it's no longer inhabitable for life as we know it. You should be afraid, or at least concerned with that. Calls to slow down global warming are part of an unprovoked war on fossil fuels. That war on fossil fuels is not unprovoked, honey. The damage they've been doing directly impacts me. Not unprovoked. The energy crisis is caused by extreme green policies, not fossil fuels. We'll talk a little bit in a moment when we get to the My Thoughts section about that one, so put a pin in that. Fracking and drilling are the path to U.S. energy security, not problems. We should find more fossil fuels, not cut back on them. Remember, fossil fuels are a finite source. Just because we find more, we don't know how long they're going to last. While they damage our planet potentially irreversibly due to us continuing to burn them. And then the US should roll back energy regulations and stop producing electric vehicles, which, you know, this one's extra funny to me because Elon Musk, who is generally pretty right-wing and out there and kind of the yes man for shit like this, he produces electric vehicles, so I'd love to know how he feels about that one. But let's get into my thoughts. I know that some of my thoughts already spilled out while reading the bullet points because this is a section that I just can't help it. I guess I'm just a fanatic. Literally nothing in that Project 2025 climate change section is backed by reputable science. Nothing. I read through that section a couple of times because I was a little bit aghast at how blatant some of it is and how a lot of it is just that right-wing anti-climate change advocacy, greatest hits, junk science propaganda. So let's talk a little bit about some of the statistics and why it's laughable that they're saying that fossil fuels have nothing to do with the changes that we're seeing and that it's extreme green policies. So if we head on over to climate.gov, which I do have linked down below if you would like, I do have all of my sources linked down below, and I greatly encourage everyone to go ahead and take a look at my sources and form your own opinions. Don't just take my word for anything. Don't just take anyone's word for anything on a topic as big as this. You should educate yourself, which, if you're this far into my video, I guess you are kind of trying to educate yourself, so good on you. Or you're hate watching and you're about to put a nasty comment down there about how I don't know what I'm talking about, which that's fine, that's valid. I'll read that. Might respond with an LOL, but moving on. So, back from that little tangent, on that climate.gov, you will have easy access to a lot of data, and that data is going to show you things like how the heating influence of human-produced greenhouse gases was 49% higher in 2022 than in 1990. Atmospheric carbon dioxide has risen 50% since people began burning fossil fuels. And those numbers might not seem like a huge deal, especially when you think about the time, but that is globally. And if you take the time to actually learn more about how even 1 degree Celsius in average temperature impacts the environment and the planet, you'll understand that those numbers are a big deal. And a lot of what you'll see people talking about when they're talking about the changing climate and really abnormal weather patterns, it's not just correlation at this point. We're getting enough data together to be able to pretty confidently pinpoint, if not causation necessarily, but the shit lines up, is what I'm saying, and what accepted, reputable scientists are saying. We also see that ocean heat levels have risen dramatically since 1955, and that puts stress on sea life at all levels, not just our charismatic macrofauna like our whales, our sharks, our dolphins, our cute little sea otters, but also things down at the planktonic level, and not just the zooplankton, but also our phytoplankton, which is responsible for a very large chunk of the photosynthesis that occurs on the planet. It's actually fascinating when you look at how much photosynthesis comes from land plants versus aquatic photosynthesizers, but that's a tangent we don't have time for right now, because this video, we're already nearing that 25-minute mark, and I commend you for sitting here and hanging out with me that long. There's so much more data available on the site though, and I encourage you to check it out while you can, because if Project 2025 does get put into effect, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, NOAA, which is the organization that collects the data and crunches the numbers, is on the list for defunding and dismantling. Which might sound crazy to you, and it should. That's not the only organization that does stuff like that that is on the list to be dismantled, but that is one of the ones that I find most concerning. I mean, not that the other ones aren't concerning as well, but that is definitely one that is absolutely insane to me to even be on the list to get rid of. Okay. So other things that I have noticed here as I've kind of read through the sections and that were pertinent to this video and skimmed other sections, and when I've been watching content from other creators talking about this, is that the Project 2025 document kept mentioning specifically in the Environmental Protection Agency section, or EPA, that there needs to be transparency with how the EPA makes their decisions and what research they're using. So naturally, I got curious. I was like, are they transparent? Are they being sneaky? Not really. I went over to their website and they have a whole section just dedicated to the research that they use to make the decisions on the policies that they do. And last time I checked, if you're trying to not be transparent, you're not going to release what research you use. So I just don't really think Project 2025 has a legitimate leg to stand on with that particular point. But, you know, I am just a snowflake on the internet. And then the document also speaks a lot about ending funding for certain research programs to get rid of some government bias, I guess, which is hilarious, because in the science world, if you're getting funding from like government organizations, that's technically some of the least biased funding you can get, because then you don't have a corporate entity putting pressure on you to potentially interpret your data and results a particular way since they're paying for your research. Those government grants are generally something that you look for when you're reading through a paper and looking at their funding sources to be like, okay, so the government is likely the most unbiased funding source that this lab has. Now, that may vary, but in general. And then the document also spent some time speaking about how organizations need to be kept in check and regulated by, I guess, laymen, people that aren't necessarily experts, which is hilarious because they talk a lot about how scientists need to be kept in check and kept honest, but who's better to hold scientists accountable than other scientists? Because no offense to the public, most of y'all, and me, myself included, like I have a bachelor's degree, but I'm probably a little bit more qualified than your average everyday Joe Schmo out there when it comes to reading a piece of scientific work and actually grasping what it says without too many issues. I might have to Google a few things and email some friends to get clarification, but in general, it's the most ridiculous thing I've read in a long time to hear that scientific regulation should not be controlled by scientists. This peer review process is one of the cornerstones of the scientific world, and being able to submit your paper and have it ripped apart by other experts in your field is one of the best ways to keep yourself accountable. because they know the accepted methodology. They can see what you probably did wrong, and they can see if your results are repeatable. And if they're not, you're probably gonna have to go back to the drawing board. And honestly, the public and most laymen don't have that know-how, and they're not equipped to read most scientific papers and determine whether or not best practices were followed and due diligence occurred and all those little T's were crossed and I's were dotted. They're just not. But I can continue that rant for a while too, as you can probably tell. So let's kind of transition into my final thoughts here. And I kind of want to leave you with this. If you are in the US and considering not voting or voting third party, I encourage you to rethink that decision. Project 2025 is a threat to the United States of America as we know it. If it is allowed to be enacted, the American people will lose our rights and there will be irreparable damage done to the planet. While I don't particularly like the option that's going to be on the ballot in November, I will hold my nose and do what I need to do to help stop the danger that is Project 2025. And I really hope that you will do the same. Okay, so if you've gotten to the end of this video, I'd like to recommend some videos by other creators that you can check out if you want to start digging deeper into this Project 2025 stuff. The first thing that I'm going to recommend is an episode of the Hang Up on the Line YouTube channel from July 3rd, 2024. Keep in mind, The Line is like a call-in show channel, so the specific section of this video that you're going to want to look for is at about 18 minutes and 20 seconds, where Matt Dillahunty is going over what he's hung up about, and that's about where he starts talking about Project 2025. But if you like debates between like atheists and people who do have spiritual beliefs or God beliefs, also stick around, because I like listening to that channel. Some of the debates they get into are actually pretty fascinating. But I digress. The next creator that I'd like to point you to is Cirrus, who does have a playlist where he's reading through Project 2025. I've linked to the part 1 of that playlist, so where he starts. I don't know if he's gonna finish reading through the document. Again, it's 920 pages long. Only Cirrus really knows for sure, and even then, it may be question marks for him as well, but it is a good choice for anyone who maybe doesn't want to read it themselves, but is okay with listening to someone else read it. And then the third and final video that I'm gonna link is a video by Genetically Modified Skeptic that is quite recent, where he is talking about how Project 2025 will impact more secularly minded people in the United States, so those of us who don't fit into that white Christian box. And then they also talk about education and stuff like that as well in that video, so it's definitely worth checking out. But that is all I have for you today. I encourage you to check out those videos that I do have linked down below if you would like to learn a little bit more about Project 2025. I also encourage you to go ahead and check out the resources that I have linked as well. Look through my sources. Always double check me. Don't just blindly trust a random person on the internet saying words at a camera. But with all that in mind, and without further ado, I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, afternoon, evening, morning, what have you. And I will see you all in the next one, hopefully a lot sooner than my last video. Bye-bye.